Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am Aaron, and this is the Inclusive Dad podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day schedule to join me in exploring ways we can create a more inclusive world together. You are important, you matter, and you can make a difference. Today, my guest is Pasha Marlowe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Why don't you just start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
I've been a therapist and coach for over 30 years. I'm a mom of three, and I'm a professional speaker about neuroinclusion and mental health, depending on where I'm speaking.
Yeah, thank you so much. When I was looking over your stuff in preparation for the interview, are you yourself neurodivergent?
I am. I consider myself multiply neurodivergent,
Okay.
ADHD, autism, PTSD, anxiety, probably more, but that's traumatic brain injury. There's always a long list. I don't know many people who are singularly neurodivergent.
Yeah. When were you diagnosed with ADHD and stuff?
So, diagnosis for ADHD came in 2020. So I'm one of those
Okay.
late
Right.
diagnosed. Um, and I can maybe speak to this, but
Sure.
a lot of neurodivergence, because it's an identity, is not diagnosed. So I was self-realized and discovered autistic, and later, because I
Sure.
wanted the confirmation from a diagnosis, which isn't always necessary, I did get that confirmation in 2022, I believe.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I've been interviewing quite a number of people that have later in life been diagnosed with some type of neurodivergence. It's interesting.
Hmm.
Lots of Many people, it's when somebody in their life has been diagnosed and they start looking into it. And it's like, hold on a second, this looks kind of familiar. Than they seek out the diagnosis themselves.
Yeah, I find that common, that often it's after a child gets
Yeah.
support at school
Yeah.
or a diagnosis, but also in midlife, hormonally, there's quite a shift for
Okay.
those that go through menopause and
Sure.
strong hormonal changes, and that also impacts our capacity quite a bit. And so sometimes we recognize how we diverge from society's idea of
Right.
normal at that time in our life. So that is quite
Okay.
common. Hmm.
Interesting. What is your definition of inclusion?
Well, including everybody, all minds and bodies. I know that sounds quite simple, but often in the inclusion space, I often find a lot of exclusion, interestingly, and kind of gatekeeping. Who can be identifying as this? Who can, talk about fill in the blank. So I really think it's important to include all minds and bodies and all functioning styles in inclusion work. And I think it's an action. It's an action word. It's not just a philosophy. It's taking action to include people in conversations, in decisions.
Yeah. So why do you think it's? I mean, you just said gave your definition and said it sounds simple. Why do you think it's not easy to like for some people to take that simple definition and put it into practice?
I think there's deep rooted stigma and bias and
Right.
misunderstanding. I think there's deep rooted oppression, systems of oppression. I just want to, I guess, reiterate that what we read and see online is still inaccurate, and AI is kind of perpetuating inaccurate narratives in its linear form.
Right.
So when we see the percentage of 15 to 25% of people neurodivergent, that's a very limited view of neurodivergence and not the inclusive definition of neurodivergent. And so I would argue it's up closer to 80%. If
Wow.
honestly, I don't meet people who would identify as neurotypical if they knew what that meant for real.
Right.
Very
I mean,
rare.
I've never. I mean, I've never tried to like get a diagnosis or anything, but I mean, there's definitely things I see in my own life in work. Have is it neurodivergence completely or not? But there's definitely things I do to you know mask or stim to get through certain times of day and stuff. So I feel like there probably is pieces of it, whether or not it's a full diagnosis. I'm not sure, but I mean, but again,
Yeah.
what is normal, right? I
Well,
mean, what is
right. So
normal?
first
Not
of all,
something.
you're exactly right. Normal is a social construct. The
Yeah.
definition of neurodivergent, it's not a diagnosis. Neurodivergent is not a diagnosis, has never been. It's not a medical term or a clinical term. It's a socio-political identity that people can choose to identify as. But anyone who diverges from society's idea of normal, so neuronormativity, or society's idea of ideal. So you mentioned stimming. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, there's nothing inherently wrong with stimming, but is
Right.
it society's quote unquote ideal of normal and ideal? No. So it does diverge from
Right.
neuronormativity. So it could be considered a form of
Yeah.
neurodivergence. And so when you think about all the different ways that people function
Yeah.
that do diverge, and the fact that I believe society is becoming more disabling with every day, I think more people will identify as neurodivergent as time goes on. And with every generation, like right now, it was a third of millennials identified as neurodivergent and disabled. Now it's half of Gen Z. So who knows where Gen Alpha is going to fall? But I'm going to imagine like
Right.
closer to 75%. And
Yeah.
disability, of course, apparent and non-apparent. But it's so broad, and it's an identity, it's an umbrella term and an identity that most people do resonate with.
Yeah. So I mean, what is your definition? What is the definition and scope of neurodiversity? You might have talked about a little bit.
So, neurodiversity is the diversity of all minds. So, the human species is neurodiverse, and that's just a fact. It's like a neutral term,
Yeah.
neurodiversity, just like there's a diversity of plants, like
Right.
biodiversity. So, that's just neurodiversity is diversity of minds. But neurodivergent is again an identity used for anyone who diverges from neuronormativity, society's idea of normal. And most of those ways are pathologized and stigmatized and often discriminated against, but rarely some aren't. For example, if somebody has a lifetime practice of meditation, they still diverge from society's idea of what is quote unquote normal, but
Yeah.
their neurodivergence is not pathologized. Long
Hmm.
COVID, not stigmatized as much as autism, for example.
Hmm. Yeah.
So often the conversation feels too limited to autism, ADHD,
Yeah.
dyslexia, when it's really a broader, more inclusive conversation that can expand widely, just like the umbrella term of disability can expand
Yes.
widely, or the
Hmm.
umbrella term of queer, is a wide umbrella. Such is true with neurodivergent.
Yeah. As you're talking about that, and mentioning, the different um, labels, my daughter, Cecilia, she's 23 now, and she has a diagnosis of cerebral palsy and epilepsy. And a lot of the stuff in our rural town in Minnesota was autism. I mean, a lot of autism stuff, which is awesome. It's just like all the
Mm.
activities were autism friendly and set up for that. So she didn't have that label. So it's just, where do you fit in? So it's just, yeah, how can we make stuff open to more groups of, or everybody, instead of, just narrowing it down that far.
I completely agree. And
Yeah.
I think that's why I said I think inclusion should
Yeah.
include all
Mhm.
minds and bodies, because, you know, with cerebral palsy and epilepsy, Cecilia could certainly go to a neuroaffirming place
Yep.
if it were actually neuroaffirming, a neuroinclusive workplace or community space if it was actually neuroinclusive. And so it does need to expand to what I sometimes call like different functioning styles, different preferences,
Right.
different ways of moving and thinking and learning and loving, and then all of a sudden it's more inclusive. I think autism, obviously important to have
Yeah.
spaces that are autism friendly and have more awareness and research and all the things, but I do agree that the conversation in our country right now when talking about neurodivergence does tend to limit it to autism and ADHD, as a disservice really to the full neurodivergent
Mhm.
community.
Yeah. What is neuro-inclusive leadership, and why is it a core competency in the modern workplace?
Yeah, well, especially with most people in the workplace now identifying as neurodivergent, I think leaders need to understand what it means, need to understand the inclusive language around it, and really need to embrace inclusive design. So rather than requiring, for example, somebody to get a diagnosis, which shouldn't
Mhm.
be a requirement for having needs met. And there's so much privilege wrapped up in diagnoses and disclosure that if somebody for access needs or support needs or sensory needs an accommodation at work, I don't think it's useful to require a diagnosis, a medical
Mhm.
label. That doesn't make sense to me. So often when I talk to leaders who want to be more neuro-inclusive, I say, talk to people about their needs. Like everybody has needs. In
Yeah.
fact, the leader has needs too.
Yep.
Um, and and when it's a conversation about needs and preferences, it de-escalates the conversation quite a
Mhm.
bit, and it doesn't require somebody to disclose something that they're not ready to disclose or don't feel psychologically safe to disclose.
Yep.
Um, and so the neuro-inclusive leadership, I think, is meeting generations where they're at right now in language and in identity, but it's also just good leadership because and with inclusive design, if you were to solve a problem for one person in the workplace, you are 100% likely serving many. So you solve for one and serve many. And there's so many examples of that. Many times leaders don't think to wonder, even curiously, oh, I wonder if somebody in this room will need closed captions, will need a video and written transcript. There's so many options out there. I talk about opposing needs a lot because sensory friendly spaces tend to be with a sense that somebody's hypersensitive and would need softer lighting and a quieter space. And that's definitely true for a lot of people. But then there's people who are hyposensitive and need bright light and music and colorful art. And one is not more important than the other.
Yep.
Everyone's,
Yep.
inherently worthy and deserving of a workspace that works for them. But opposing needs is a conversation that leaders need to be able to navigate. If some people on the call want video off and some need video on, how do you
Sure.
navigate that?
Yep.
And I think they're running into these conflicts often without the skills and the tools to respectfully have these conversations.
Yeah. So maybe how do you balance that situation you kind of discussed where some people kind of need the or you know dimmer lights and some people may need brighter lights? How would you as a leader kind of navigate that situation if they both need to be in the same room?
Yeah, when they're in the same room, it is certainly tricky because I mean,
Right.
ideally, it's
Yeah.
flexibility.
Yep.
Flexibility in workstations and environments and
Sure.
remote work options. But if you're in a, let's say, meeting, and the fluorescent lights are on, and let's say many people have mentioned that those lights give them a migraine headache,
Yep.
and then somebody else says that they like the stimulation of a bright light. You know, it doesn't really make sense to compromise and have the lights on half the time and off
Right.
half the time, but I might suggest, okay, can we turn the lights off and offer another way for the person who needs stimulation? Perhaps they're closer to a window, perhaps there's
Sure.
fidget objects, perhaps
Yep.
there's a movement session, a movement break,
Hmm.
so that they're honoring the person's needs for stimulation, um, and also honoring the needs of people who wouldn't be able to concentrate if the lights remained on, would have to leave. So it's a conversation, but it's a respectful conversation where nobody's needs are more important than others.
Yeah.
And 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 then designing spaces with as much flexibility and options as possible is ideal. It's the future. It's not where we are yet.
Yeah. No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense for my daughter. A lot of our stuff that's come up is she's in a wheelchair, so just a lot of the physical being able to access the space. So it's just, I mean, it's just crazy how stuff being built now is still not fully accessible for her, and it's how many years past ADA. So it's just, but again, I've seen this graphic on Facebook where it's a school, I think, and there's steps and a ramp, and there's snow on it, and they're shoveling the steps first, and it's like if you would
Yes.
shovel the ramp first, everybody can get in. So just things like that where she needs a curb cut or a ramp to get in, but I mean, she's not the only person that uses it. If you have a stroller, have a hard time walking, or bringing something heavy in, everybody uses it. So just
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
ramps and curb cuts are such a beautiful example of it. And I and just having that lens, like as soon as somebody said shovel the ramp first, it might not occur to people.
Right.
But that creates access for everybody. Sometimes, we're in this space, we're thinking about it, we're living it,
Yep.
we have a lived
For
experience
sure.
with our children. So it's very obvious to us.
Mhm.
And and it's just not in the forefront of many people's minds.
Yeah.
So it
For sure.
takes education and skills
Yeah.
training, mindset shifting.
Yeah. My partner, we've been together 4 years now, and before we were together, she did not have the exposure to somebody in a wheelchair she does now with my daughter being around sometimes, and she's just told me many times she thought, she heard the law was passed, so to make stuff accessible, so she just thought everything was good, and then being with me and my daughter going places, her eyes have been open to seeing all the things where it's just still not. If my daughter likes going to concerts, I call ahead of time just to make sure. They're like, yeah, it is. But like, I've been to enough concerts where it hasn't been. So I'm just trying to make sure I know what's going on so she can enjoy the show or get to the spot. So it's just, yeah, it's interesting. Like you
Mhm.
said, if you're not aware of it, you're not aware of it. So it's a big part
Exactly.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, there could be accessible seating, but not accessible
Yeah.
access to the building
Yeah.
itself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so often, if not all the time, I talk to advocates in the space. They have
Yeah.
personal lived experience with
Yep.
disability in themselves or family members. And that's why we're so passionate. And it's a shame that in humanity, I feel like this is true. Like people don't care until it happens to them in some way, whether it's an illness or a diagnosis or disability, doesn't matter. But if we could back that up and not from a fear place, say, well,
Yeah.
you're going to be disabled one day too, so you
Yep.
should care. That doesn't tend to work. But
Right.
when I offer training and presentations, I really talk about, what are your thoughts when I say neurodiversity? What comes to mind? When I say disability, what comes to mind? And then where did you learn that? And how could we start to unwind and unlearn our own stigma and bias that's kind of baked in from
Mhm.
childhood and to question it and challenge it and say, for
Right.
example, with disorder, and I'm a therapist, so I work in the pathology paradigm where
Sure.
unfortunately every single diagnosis ends in the word disorder. But I don't believe many of the labels should end in disorder. And I don't believe that people are disordered in all the ways that
Mhm.
that I'm still working within this pathology paradigm. So it's a system we work in, but we can still
Yep.
challenge it. I can still
Yeah.
say, you know, so this is a diagnosis of grief disorder, but I don't believe you're disordered in your grief because you've been
Right.
grieving the loss of your child for more than 6 months. That's not how I'm thinking of you. That's not how I'm talking about you.
Yeah.
That's not how we're going to have a conversation about grief. But unfortunately, on this paper at this time, given the system we work in, the diagnostic code to
Yep.
get you more sessions ends in disorder. And I'll
Yep.
have a very open, transparent conversation with my clients about that often with ASD. You don't have to call it ASD. You can call it autism, bipolar disorder. Just say bipolar. There's hundreds of ways to take the language and depathologize and destigmatize before the whole system can shift.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but I have similar thoughts on labels like that because my daughter, she's even saying out loud like cerebral palsy or epilepsy. I mean, I don't think that's who she is. That's how I try to describe her so people can have a little
Mm,
understanding, but just all the things where, yeah, like you're saying, she needs the diagnosis to be able to access like special education or go through all this testing, but that's not a complete picture of who she is. So yeah, how do you balance that? It's an interesting conversation for sure because she has cerebral palsy, so her left side hand is affected. So her fine motor is not the best, and she's also somewhat nonverbal. So all the testing for in school was you have to have fine motor skills and be able to talk clearly. So that she always tested way quite low, and it's like she would say word she'll throw out a word I've never heard before in a sentence, like in the right context. I'm like, okay, so there's these little snippets where it's like I don't believe the testing completely because it's just you can't test her, like the way, with her limitations. So it's just interesting.
Yeah. And most importantly, she's Cecilia, and our
Yep.
society kind of starts looking at people through the lens of their
Yep.
labels. And when you know somebody well and love somebody, the labels are quite just
Right.
s- not even secondary,
Yeah.
beyond that. And so, but to advocate for your daughter,
Yep.
to advocate for my children, I did use the labels more than I do in my own personal life with them
Right.
to get the accommodations. But then I'll also now, just because I've been doing this for a while, also challenge the people in the room about how the teachers or the counselors, how they're
Yep.
talking about my
Yes.
child,
Mhm.
how they're leading with the labels, and not referring to their name as often,
Yeah.
not referring to the nuance and the
Right.
complexity of who this child is outside of all that.
Yeah. And that was my through the schools part of it was that was kind of my concern. It's because it seemed like once she had the test, got the label, that stuck with her. Like it's in the reports, it's in all the stuff people look at, and then they see that and come to these assumptions about who she is based on that. So that was
Mm.
also you need the
Yeah.
label to get the services, but then it kind of you see all the negative pieces as well. So you're kind of balancing all that.
It's so true. I know. And I'm sure it comes down to time and
Yep.
resources often, because it would be lovely if we can go in and say, this is what makes my kid laugh. This is what my
Right.
kid enjoys.
Yep.
This is their value. This is their favorite thing,
Right.
and allow them time to know our kid beyond the labels. But it's a 15-minute
Yeah.
appointment and
For sure.
everyone's on a time crunch. And it's like that in doctors' offices and
Yeah.
in therapist offices, even and certainly in the workplace where people have this sense that they don't
Right.
have the time to care more. and
Right.
and I disagree. I think
Yeah.
if we cared more, we would create more capacity and more space to care and to create change.
Yeah. For sure. So growing up, did you have any exposure to neurodiversity or
Yeah, yeah,
okay,
yeah. I didn't always have the language that I have
sure.
now. My father definitely autistic. um I'm autistic and ADHD. At least one of my children, I believe, is autistic. And so growing up, the in 1970 when I was born,
Yep.
in the early 70s,
Yep.
as you know, because I heard in another episode, it was mainly about young boys with behavioral problems in school. And I
Mhm.
was a quiet, shy, relatively good
Right.
student who never talked because I didn't understand what was going on, but I didn't have the tools, nor the strength, nor the permission to contribute and share who I was. So I felt pretty invisible for most of grade school. Um, and interestingly, one of your previous guests shared something that I would share for myself as well. Moving every
Mhm.
couple years and not really ever having the opportunity to settle into a community at a school, or for have them to recognize my needs or progression. And then I think, why did I move every couple years? And that goes back to my parents,
Mhm.
neurodivergence, maybe my mom ADHD needing to move every couple years. And what does that do to a child with ADHD
Right.
moving every couple years who might need resources? And so, it's a systemic
Yeah.
dynamic.
Yeah. It's interesting because for me, when my daughter was born, I didn't. I mean, I'm looking back, I don't remember anybody using the word disability, any of that stuff at all during up prior to my daughter being born. So it was just all brand new. So I learned all that stuff from at that point. So it's just interesting how people's come across it or it's interesting.
Yeah.
'Cause, yeah, I don't ever remember hearing the word special education, seeing anybody in wheelchairs. It's now I wonder, were they actually there? I just didn't notice them because I didn't have anybody close to me, so it's interesting.
Yeah, it reminds me of, when you want to buy a
Yeah,
car, you always see that car. When I'm
everybody.
pregnant, I
Yep,
see pregnant people. So I
yep,
think once our awareness is there, I think that's
yeah,
the benefit of talking so much about this
yep,
and offering awareness and education, because more people will likely have it in their frame of reference, and filtering things through that new knowledge. So I'm appreciative of how much workplaces are embracing as much as possible
Sure.
inclusion, neuroinclusion. I know this year has been a little more challenging than others for sociopolitical reasons, but some
Mhm.
organizations are certainly still prioritizing inclusion, and specifically neuroinclusion, because that's my lens, but
Yeah.
globally as well. Globally as well. It's,
Yeah.
just like with any disability inclusion, it's not happening as fast as it needs to happen.
Right.
Um, and we have so far to go.
Yeah. Yeah, my daughter, she probably it's been over 10 years ago now. She was in choir and she had a concert where they had it at a old historic theater in the town where we live, and it wasn't accessible, so I ended up having to carry her up, pick her up out of her wheelchair, carry her on the stage, set her down, and then get her back off the stage.
Mm,
And then finally, just a couple months ago, that theater has now been renovated and became accessible. So it took over 10 years from when that event happened for us till now. If she wanted to, she could go with her wheelchair out on the stage. It's just, yeah, it
mhm.
takes with. It's like, why
Yeah,
does it take that long? I mean, I'm thankful it's now that's been fixed, so nobody else has to go through it. It's just it takes so long, and as a parent, you want it now for your kids so they can handle it, and it's just. But
absolutely.
I know that I've heard from others that are me doing that have kept in people's minds the whole time and was one of the reasons that they wanted to get it done. So I mean, at least we had a piece in it. It's just it never happens fast enough, it seems.
No, it doesn't. And if it's money that often stands in the
Yeah,
way, had they created more accessibility 10 years ago or even
right.
5 years ago, more disabled people would have been able to
Yep,
access the
yep,
event space, and they would get money from the people who bought
right.
tickets. And so
Yep.
I feel like the places that are accessible and inclusive and respectful are really going to ultimately do better in
Right.
business. But the ROI isn't always clear up
Yeah.
front, and I think everyone's currently, and right now it's
Mhm.
November 2025. We're quite overstimulated as a society, almost at capacity. We're overwhelmed
Yeah.
with a lot of information, an
Yes.
onslaught of information and news right now. And I think the low capacity, not an excuse, it's just an explanation as to why a lot of things are happening slowly right now. I'm noticing most all of my clients are saying they're at or beyond capacity.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is one tip that you can share to listeners to help them be more inclusive today? So just something anybody can start doing today to be more inclusive?
Yeah. I would say from a neuro inclusion lens and from a mental health inclusion lens, that just because our language doesn't yet support a depathologizing and destigmatizing of people and labels in general, doesn't mean we can't ourselves think about and talk about people differently. Something like, we talk about somebody who hears voices and we think, oh, that's a problem. That's a problem to be fixed. That person needs medication or treatment. Not necessarily. Is it a problem for that person? In our culture, hearing voices might feel like it is
Mhm.
a problem to be fixed because that's the way it's always been. But in some cultures, that's a person who's wise or spiritually connected.
Yep.
So I just always try to unravel the norms
Mhm.
and why is this and who taught this to me and what makes them decide, how are
Mhm.
they the voice of
Yeah.
reason and truth. And so,
Yeah.
and this over time I think is one of the benefits of growing old is that
Mhm.
we start to actually question authority more and
Yep.
question systems more. And yeah, so I guess I would encourage people to have critical thinking and curiosity
Mhm.
about the way things are, and be open to being change agents to shift the paradigms.
Yeah. That's a great tip, and it came to mind. I mean, I didn't, like I said, I didn't know anything about disabilities, so I just kind of went along with stuff until things happened where
Mhm.
you notice, like, one doctor would, use this method to treat a seizure she was having, and the next one would do something different. I'm like, hold on a second. They're
Mhm.
they're human just like me. They're taking in the inputs and making a decision what they feel is the best decision based on the inputs and their knowledge and whatever. So it's like then that kind of opened up stuff to me because I always thought people with doctors or teachers were like God, and I couldn't question them. And I'm like, hold on a second, they're people.
Oh
They don't like
yes,
they don't like being questioned all the time, but I have the right to question them if something doesn't make sense. So yeah, those things where it's like,
absolutely.
okay, that doesn't make sense. I need to ask a question. So that's a great tip.
And you know yourself best and you
Yep.
know your kid best.
Yep.
And so many times I've been to doctors with my kid and misdiagnosis or
Yep.
misinterpretation or just doing something not in service to them.
Yep.
And advocating for our kids is
Yep.
that's like it's a big growth curve and learning lesson
Yes.
that we have when we have a child with extra needs and medical
Yep.
needs. And so but we step into that and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden we can't unsee it, we can't unlearn it, so then we typically become advocates for other people who are trying to
Yep.
navigate those systems. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Where's the best place for everybody to connect with you?
Well, I'm the only Pasha Marlowe in the world, as it turns out. So pashamarlowe.com is
Sure.
my website. I'm on LinkedIn every day, Pasha Marlowe. And
Awesome.
my email is pasha@pashamarlowe.com.
There you go. We
Even if
made
you
it.
just remember Pasha neurodiversity, you're still going to find me.
Still gonna find it. Yeah, for sure. Are you ready for the last question?
Ah, I guess so. Yeah. What's up?
Do you like spam lunch meat? Yes or no?
I don't myself.
Okay, that's cool.
Is
I
that
live
the
near.
extent of the question? It's like a survey,
That's
a spam survey.
It is a spam survey because I live near Austin, Minnesota, where they make spam and where the spam museum is located. So I've been
Uh-huh.
asking everybody as a fun like pop it on you question just to see what answers are.
Awesome. Yeah, you know what? I might enjoy the taste, but my stomach doesn't enjoy the feeling.
Oh,
How's that?
there you go.
I don't
Yeah,
digest it.
no judgment. Just it's a fun question. So usually it's pretty fast, yes or no. There's not a lot of. Let me think about it.
Yeah, except I'm autistic, so now I'm going to give you a really long explanation of why.
It's all good. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks, everyone.
To those listening, thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey. It is truly an honor. Please join the podcast newsletter by clicking on the link in the episode description to keep up with the latest episodes. Together, we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.